Afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our four-part series on Nautobot plugin development. Just to recap where we are so far, so on Tuesday we started by creating our development environment for our plugin. We started our initial package creation using Poetry. We then on Wednesday went through, created our base model, did a little bit of testing with our base model. Yesterday we went and we actually created our API views and started from there. And today we are now going to be starting off with creating our user interface. So as we kind of think through some of the bells and whistles and the moving parts of machinery of the user interface, there's a couple things to kind of keep in mind. We're going to need to have all of our CRUD operations, so create, retrieve, update, delete. And what's that going to look like from that standpoint? Are we going to have just our list-based view? We're going to have some detail views. We can talk about a couple different things along the way. How are we navigating there? So there's a tremendous amount that I'd like to cover today. So let's just go ahead and get started. So as we can see, we have our API up and going. We have our Nautobot instance up and going, and I've got the core code of Nautobot in the back as a frame of reference. And if we take a peek of where we're at, I did also test and forgot to come back and do this at the end of the day yesterday. So let's, instead of doing IP range with URL pattern, let's just go ahead and just say we don't need to specify a nested route for this, where we can just say anything that's inside of IP range is just going to be automatically sent to this register. And so what does that look like from the API perspective? This was the URL pattern that we had yesterday, which was API plugins IP range. So this was first IP range was coming from the base URL inside the under init. And then the second IP range was coming from the urls.py inside of the API. So now if I hit enter, what I'm expecting is a 404. Essentially, there's nothing found there. But what I need to do is actually take that away and close it off here. And so let's talk about this for half a second before I proceed on. So one of the reasons why I just got a 404 and still saw IP range is that with the default router and the way it's registering, it's expecting the UUID, or the primary key, of an object to be there. So if I would have, so if we see what that would look like, let's just hit enter. And if we want to look at this specific object, this instance of the object, this is the reason why we got a 404 not found, but it still appeared to be an IP range. If I just add on to the end foo, we're getting a completely different 404 not found. We're getting a 404 as a stack, as this URL pattern doesn't exist. So the reason behind that is that it's taking what's positionally between these last two forward slashes and using that to try and find the underlying object. So by having this as IP range, it's still technically something within those two forward slashes, and it's trying to find an IP range instance of the object. But since we have removed that from the URL pattern in the urls.py on our router, all we have to specify is just the base URL that's coming from the init.py. So I verified that and forgot to touch back on that in yesterday's live stream, so I just wanted to bring that back up and go from there. Cool. So let's kind of think through a couple of different things that we may want to start off with. And unfortunately, it seems like we're probably going to have a lot of things that come to fruition at once, which is kind of fun, kind of interesting at times, kind of waterfall. But let's see what we can try and do, and let's see what value we can add and what increments we can do along the way. Looking through, let's see how we want to accomplish this. All right. let's just start by creating our create and edit view. So our create and edit view is going to give us the ability to essentially create or edit an existing object. And so there's a couple things that we're going to need. So we're not going to be working with the API anymore. We're just going to be in the UI, which is going to be just directly inside of the Nautobot plugin IP range folder. So let's first need a model preset and a form. So let's first create our form. So let's create our forms.py. And then within our forms.py, we are going to create a model form. And very similarly to a lot of the other things that we have been talking about over the past couple days, is having the ability to extend from base and not necessarily having to worry about building all these moving parts and machinery. Some things we are going to be extending from the Django REST framework base. Some of them are going to be coming from Nautobot itself. So actually I am a little bit ahead of myself. I do need to technically create a separate field, and I'm going to do a separate mixin for that. The reason behind that is that we are having a I might be able to use that somewhere else. Interesting. We can try something a little bit, but that's all good. It's not a big deal. All right, so let's go ahead and create our field first. And so we could create our field inside of our forms.py. It doesn't necessarily matter, but we're going to create it in a separate file just so that we have this clear delineation of what we're working on and where it should be. So let's go ahead and create a fields.py. And there's a couple things that we're going to be inheriting from. So we're going to be inheriting from Django forms. So we're going to do from Django import forms. And then we are going to need to pull in something from Nautobot core. We need to pull in an IP address form field. So from nautobot.ipam.form fields import IP address form field. All right. So we're going to actually create a model form, and then we're actually going to create this as a mixin for this specific field, where in a certain extent, I'm trying to think through this, because I'm looking at what I've already done, and I'm kind of wondering, could I have done this better or done this differently? You know what? I don't need to do this as a mixin. Reevaluating. Let's do this differently. Don't save that. Let's come over here. Let's drop that in there. And let's go ahead and do a few more imports. We do from Nautobot utilities forms import, and we're going to need a bootstrap mixin. That's going to give us some of our CSS stuff, so we're not having to worry about that ourselves. I'm sitting here looking at this just to make sure there's nothing else that I'm mixing. Let's go ahead and also grab our tag. I don't need this just yet. I'll grab that later. And we're going to do also the dynamic model choice field. That, and we are also going to need to do need to grab our VRF model as well. Sorry, I'm jumping around just a little bit, but bear with me for just one moment and we'll be off to the races. So nautobot.ipam.models import VRF. And now we need to start going through and importing our local items. So we need to do from Nautobot plugin IP range models, because we're keeping with that same pattern that we did with the API, import IP range. Cool. Went all the way around the world to come back to exactly where I was going to be starting off with. So let's go ahead and keep the same pattern that we've been working with. So we're going to subclass. But we're going to come from a couple different model inheritances. So let's do an IP range form. And we're going to subclass this from the bootstrap mixin. and then the forms dot model form. All right. So because we are doing some fun things with IP addresses and the fact that these are a var binary IP field within Nautobot itself, and so this is a little bit different than the IP field that came with Postgres, we're going to have to do a little bit of overwriting. So let's do a start address, and this is going to be equal to an IP address form field. End address is going to be equal to a IP address form field. All right, that's all that we need there. Let's go in and set our meta. So class meta, and do our model of the range. And we are going to need to specify our fields. So we will do fields equal, we'll do a list. Please stop auto completing for me. We are going to start address and address bref description. Let's just start with that for now. We can always come back and add more later. And now, because we are working with the var binary, we're going to need to overload a couple things. So this is a little bit more of an advanced item. This is not necessarily something that you're going to have to do on your typical plugin, but I chose to choose a little bit more of an advanced item to use in this plugin, which if I would have had a little bit more forethought, I may not have chosen this specific model, but it's all good. So we're going to pull out our instance of an object, and it's going to be instance quarks.get instance, and initial equals quarks.get initial, and then we're just going to default our initial object as a empty dictionary if one does not exist, and you're going to copy. And so essentially what we are going to want to do is if the and so this is going to give us the ability to where that if we're editing an object, we are able to pre-populate the field. This is not necessarily going to give us any type of benefit for creating. This is just for the fact of editing. And like I said, because we're using the var binary, there's a couple things that we're going to need to kind of work around and make things work for it to work in our favor. So essentially what we're doing is we have a copy of our instance, and we're going to do we have a copy of our initial, so we're going to do if instance dot start address does not equal a byte of empty string. We do initial start address equal instance dot start. So essentially we're saying that if the instance of the object does not equal an empty binary, we're going to assign the instance of start address to the initial. And so whenever this is used to render that page, it's going to pre-populate that form with this data. And so we're essentially going to need to do the same thing for end address. That there and there. So we got our start address and our end address, making sure that we're going to pre-fill that information. And then let's go ahead and make sure that we stick this back into Quark. So Quark's initial equals initial. So we're good to go there. Now we can just call a super on the init and just pass in args, not rags, args, largs. Not doing that as positional. We're good to go there. And then we are going to be setting a, we're going to overload the clean method with clean self is the only argument that we're passing into clean. And before we do anything, we're actually just going to call a super on clean. And the reason why we're doing this is going to give us the ability to run the proper clean on the model. So we need this to set the actual instant attributes of start address and end address to have that proper validation from the model.clean. Self.instance.start address equals self.clean data.get start address, and we'll do the same thing for end address. And I believe that is all that we need from the overload of the init and the clean function for the IP range form. Let's sit here. Oh, nope, we got to import that we imported but we never used. So let's go ahead and add that as well. So vref equals dynamic model choice field, and in the dynamic model choice field, we are going to need to assign the query set, and we're going to tell it that it is not required. So query set. Objects.all. And then let's go ahead and just give it a label so we can make sure that we know what it is, which is vref. And then because not everything is going to require a vref, let's say required equals false. And then we're also going to get the description that's going to come in implicitly as a char field. We don't have to necessarily set that. That'll just automatically get done for us. Cool, that's all been done. My format on save just happened. I'm going to get rid of this file because I don't need it. Goodbye. And let's come over to our views. And to do that, let's go ahead and create our views. I love it whenever VS Code thinks it's doing something super special for me and it's just driving me bonkers. So we got our views.py. And inside of our views.py, we're going to need to import a couple of things. We're going to import only one thing from core, which is kind of a little bit different than what we've been working with so far. So from usually most of our imports require several things from core. But we are just going to import one thing from core. We're just going to import generic from views. And then from our Nautobot plugin IP range, we're going to import models, and we're going to import forms. So now let's go through and let's create our create/edit view. So let's go ahead and do that. So class IP range, and we're going to call this edit. The edit and the create view are actually going to work one in of itself. You don't necessarily have to define them separately. They're both going to be able to be consumed as one. And I've got add view, so edit view, which is going to be coming from generic objects edit view. And then I believe all we need to specify is going to be our query set. which is going to be IP range models dot range objects dot all, and then we need to specify our model form. So the form that we just created and we overloaded. So it'll be forms dot IP range form. So you're probably wondering, so previously, especially like in forms, you'd see we'd just directly import the IP range, which we could have done that in views, but I've got to work with models, I've got to work with forms, I've got to work with tables, I've got to work with a couple different items. And from the tables and the forms perspective, there potentially could be multiple items that are imported at once. So instead of having to go through and have a lot larger of an import area, I'm just going to do this quick-handed and we should be good to go. Go ahead and save that. So now we have our create and our edit view. Now we need to wire it up to a URL pattern. So similar to how we did it in our API, we'll create a urls.py. And inside of our urls.py, we're going to need to do a couple of our fun little imports. We're going to do from Django.urls import path. And from Nautobot plugin IP range import models, comma, views. All right. So we've got essentially our views that are imported, our models that are imported, and we're going to be using the only other thing right now from a core product is going to be Django URLs path. So we need to specify our URL patterns. That's not right. URL patterns. So this is going to be a list. I love it how it tries to autocomplete for me. So let's go ahead and specify our path. So this is something that, based off of what we did for the previous one, we're not going to necessarily specify a leading part because we're just going to take the IP range that's coming from the base URL. We're not going to start with it. And what we are going to do is do add and make sure we have a closing forward slash for that. As our first argument, our second argument is going to be our view. Start IP range edit view, and then we are going to name it. So we do name equals, and we're going to do a all lowercase of the model name underscore, and this is going to be add. We have that there, and then essentially we are going to do the same exact thing. We're going to do it for edit, and I can showcase that in just a moment. Back to the edit, we may not be able to get fully into understanding what we're doing just then. That's not what I needed. And actually what I need this to be is I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going off script, going off the reservation. So our edit view, I actually need the edit view to know what specific instance of an object that I'm going to be editing. And for us to know what instance of the object I'm going to be editing, I need to tell the URL pattern that I'm looking for something. And so what we're looking for is a UUID type of field, a UUID positional argument, and that's going to be mapping to the primary key. And then it's going to be forward slash edits forward slash. And then our name of this URL pattern is going to be edit, so IP range edit. Cool. So if we go into the URLs and what I'm expecting to happen after I reload the process. And we'll just monkey around with this just for a moment. Is if we were to go in this URL pattern, which I'm expecting this to give me a 404 at this time, which is plugins, my base URL from the init.py of IP range, my UUID, and then edit. I'm expecting that to go into this specific URL pattern inside my urls.py. And because of what we did to overload the init and pulling in this information, we're going to see the assigned VRF. We're going to see the assigned description, the assigned start address, and the assigned end address that were already there from the original object. So whenever that is done, what we'll actually see is that we'll see a start address of 10.0.0.1, end address of 10.0.0.3, and we'll see a VRF, and it'll show the actual VRF in a more user readable fashion than just the UUID. And then we'll see the description, which in this instance is blank. But because this is not implemented just yet, we're getting a 404. This is expected. And then the other URL pattern, what I'm expecting to be able to do is to add, and this would bring up that same exact form, except all the fields are expected to be blank. So if we come back here, let's go ahead and save this. We see that Nautobot is not refreshing because Nautobot did not know to track this specific file or any of the other files that we've just created. So let's go ahead and Control-C out of that, run our server again. Turn address and IP range is not an editable field. Let me take a peek at this. Make sure I'm not missing something. On my application code, I actually don't have it specified in the fields. I'm wondering if that's going to give me. Let's give it a shot. There's a little bit of tomfoolery I'm doing because behind the scenes of using the the var binary. So let's take a look. Now let's see what's going on here. Compare my notes. I'm missing something. I need to tell Django that this is an as view. So it's gonna, using the as view is going to be looking inside of this method to see what's specifically published. So we're going to see for the as view on this, we essentially would have a get and a post that would be published for that specific URL pattern. Now, if I refresh it, boom, successful. Sometimes I can make things happen. Not always, sometimes. So we got our VRF. Let's do a description of my first UI edits. And let's do 4 to 44, create. And I'm expecting after I create this is actually going to error out because I don't have anything to really return it back to at this point. Oh, it just returned me back to my to the default to the base page, which that's all good. Now if we wanted to go back in and take a peek at our plugins IP range, we see that we now have this new item, this new ID that has been created. And if we come here, look at that, we've got our detail view. And if we want to try swap over into our UI, we'll see that we have in our edit view, we see that we're editing an IP range, and we see the VRF that's assigned to it. We see the description. Let's go ahead and update the description. Hit save, and it's been updated. So now we are off to the races. We already automatically see that we have a changelog that's being created. So this is really kind of cool. We're creating objects with the Django framework. We are able to edit our objects with the Django framework. However, we are not necessarily able to understand what we've done. We're not able to see our list-based view, or we're not able to see a detail view of items. So let's take a second to kind of think, what do we need to create? What do we need to create to do our list-based view or a detail-based view? And which one do we want to do first? Let's see. Let's go ahead and create a detail view. And on the detail view, there's a couple things that we're going to do. We're going to need to create a folder called templates. Come on, what could we think? All right, so we're in here, we're going to create a folder called templates. And then inside of templates, we are going to create another folder called Nautobot plugin IP range. So what it's going to be looking for, especially because we're going to be taking advantage of some of the underlying magic that we get from Nautobot, is it's going to be looking inside of templates for for our specific plugin name, and then the lowercase representation of our model.html. So whenever we're putting together our view, we're going to need templates, Nautobot plugin IP range, and then a new file called iprange.html. And we're never going to reference this file path. This is going to automatically just get done and pulled in based off of how we are defining our views, and it's going to know to look for this specific template based off of what our models that we're using. If we wanted to, we could actually overload this and specify a template underscore name, and we could name our template foobar. Doesn't really matter. But since we're taking advantage of all of these great things that are coming from Nautobot Core, we don't have to worry about this. And just because I'm going to cheat, because there's a lot of HTML here, and I don't like I don't like talking through HTML. I'm just going to copy paste it, and we are going to change this from Control F, Nautobot firewall models to Nautobot plugin IP range. So all this will be up to date. It'll be correct inside of the repo whenever we post it. But just for the sake of doing things right now, like I said, I just wanted to quickly copy pasta it, and I can Control F my way through life. Seems like that's a lot of things that I do through life. Just Control F, just find my way through. All right, so let's go ahead and talk through this for a little bit. So up on the top, we see that we have a ordered list, and it has two list items inside of that ordered list. One of them is going to be list-based view, and then we're going to specify the object. We're also going to see that we have form actions. Going back to our IP list, IP range list, we can see here that if we have edit functionality, it's going to give us the ability to go to the edit view. If we have delete functionality, it's going to take us to the delete view. We're going to substitute our object in here. If we have any custom links that may be pulled in, we're going to specify those there. And then we are going to reference our get absolute URL, which this is one of the things that we did on our model, but we commented out because we weren't in the process. We hadn't implemented it just yet. It's going to reference a changelog representation of it. And then we come down to actually what we're going to come down to the actual table that we're going to be building. So we have just a simple table class. We have a description, start, end, size, and our VRF, and we're going to pull the get absolute VRF. So if we wanted to go straight to the VRF, we can, but we're going to default that to just a placeholder. It's a long-winded way of explaining that whole thing all the way around the world. So now let's come back over to our views and let's wire up our view. This is where I really start loving Django, and I know I talked about this yesterday with our API views, with our serializers and the view set, but having the ability to have a very, very minimal amount of code, as long as we ignore the HTML, but a very minimal amount of code and having a lot of functionality. So let's go ahead and create our detail view. So we have class, IP range, keeping all that same exact pattern, and we can call this detail view. This is going to be subclassing from generic, and it's going to be object view. and there is only one class level attribute that we need to set, and that is going to be our query set. Let's go models dot IP range dot objects dot all, and then reset. So like we should be good, right? Like everything should be able to be working, should be able to come here. Let's go back to our, like I said, we're going to do our fun little long way around the world to get to exactly where we want. Go to our API, then remove the API from it. This should work, right? Well, not just yet. Part of the reason why is that we haven't implemented our URL pattern. So let's go ahead and add our URL. Then we'll see if it's going to work. Oh, hush, little girl, you're fine. Sorry, it's my dog. Anytime she hears something outside, she has to have an opinion on the matter. So let's go ahead and let's start creating this. So we have our URL path of, we need to specify the UUID and primary key, or UUID type mapping to a primary key. And we need to reference the detail view instead of the edit view. So detail view, let me reference my notes. And the pattern for our detail view is we don't necessarily need to append anything to the end. So it's just going to be IP range for the name. Let's go ahead and save that. So this should work, right? I should be able to go to the detail view of this specific object and I should have my detail. Let's give it a shot. It's not going to work. So a couple things why. Part of the reason why it's not going to work is the fact that we have references to other views that have not been created yet. So this IP range list, IP range edit we've created, IP range delete has not been created, and IP range changelog has not been created. So those have not been created. So I think based off of just these specific ones, we need to create lists and we need to create our changelog and our delete. So let's go ahead and let's create our list, changelog, and delete views. And the way that we will do that, okay, cool. I was making sure I'm referencing the right set of notes here. Let's go ahead and first start with our delete view. So we'll do a class of IP range delete view generic. It's going to be object delete view. And same thing, we're just going to need our query set. Let me just take a peek at what I need for changelog type views. So changelog, I don't have to actually specify that as a view itself. So that's just something that we'll specify within our URL patterns to get that up and going. And then the next view that we need to create is going to be our list view. So we'll do class IP view generic dot objects list view, and then on the list view we're going to need a little bit more information actually. We're going to need our query set. We're going to need a filter set, a filter form, a table, and action buttons. So filter set form, table, and action buttons. But let's just see if we can implement this view without that information just yet, just to see if we can get the detail view up and going. So let's first just care about getting the detail view up and going, and then we're going to come back and see what we can do with finishing buttoning up the list space view. So let's come back over to urls.py. Let me go back and make sure I've saved my views, which we have now. We're going to need to do an import from Nautobot core. So from nautobot.extras.views import object changelog view. I think that's all that we're going to need to add from that perspective. So now let's button up our delete view first, and then we'll add our changelog view. And you can see that all of our patterns are being very similar in fashion, so we can very easily look at something and understand where we are at within the code and know exactly what to look for, what to inspect if we're troubleshooting an item. And you can kind of also, if you haven't really noticed just yet, but you can see that I am specifying these in a very specific order so that I don't have to worry about the way. So behind the scenes, the actual URL patterns with the routers are going to be essentially just doing regex parsing, more or less, not really, but it's going to be looking at the URL patterns to try and understand which path to associate it with. And if you're not careful whenever you're defining your paths, and you define them in an improper order, you could actually get into a scenario where you accidentally invoke the wrong one. So I'm doing these in a very specific order, so I know that I'm going down the right path, and I'm going to the right view from the path that is requested. So we got, and just very similar to how everything else we're doing. This is a one model plugin, so I'm not namespacing the URL pattern. I'm just using the base URL from init.py as we've been using so far today, and as I demonstrated at the beginning of the stream. So we'll do views dot IP range list view dot as view, and then name is going to be IP range list because it's a list-based view, and that gets us knocked out for our list view. And let's go ahead and do our changelog. So we do changelog, and this is actually not going to be a view that we create. This is going to be object changelog. And we're going to change the name from IP range delete to IP range changelog. And then we're going to need to specify quarks that we pass in, which is going to be we're telling the actual changelog view which model we are caring about, so models.ip range. So this gives us the ability of inheriting the changelog view from the core and not having to invent it ourselves. And we're just specifying to the changelog view what specific model we care about. So go ahead and save that. See our URL, see all that is up to snuff. Like I said, I'm not expecting the list-based view to work just yet because we don't have enough moving parts of machinery to account for the list view. But I had the list view registered in the routers. I'm sorry, in the URL patterns. So whenever the detail view attempts to do a reverse on plugins, Nautobot, plugin, IP range list, IP range delete, and IP range changelog, it knows where to go. It can at least resolve those URL patterns. Like I said, we're going to come back. We're going to add more to this list view, but I wanted to iterate and continue to add value instead of having this one giant waterfall of everything coming out at one time. So now we can now see that we have our detail-based view, and we also are able to see our change log, and we can see all the underlying changes. We can see exactly what happens, and that's all there. And if we go and click edit, it's going to take us to our edit view, and if we click on delete, we're going to get a confirmation on if we want to actually delete that specific object or not. We can hit cancel to get out of it, and we are this actually sailing along pretty smoothly. So what happens if we go to that list view? We got a bunch of fun things that are yelling at us. So let's dive into that. Let's get some of these fun things knocked out. So we need to create our filter set form, and our table, and then add our actions. Come back over to views. So actually, before we even get into that, let's go ahead and create filters. Oh, and there's my dog again having an opinion. Okay, so we're going to do filters.py. And so inside of filters.py, we're going to be inheriting from a couple different things. And so actually, before we even get to that, I want to show something really kind of interesting. So if we go into the browsable API from Nautobot, and I'm going to browse to our specific, because we've already published this, because we have this published into the plugins API, this is automatically going to get pulled up. And if we go to our list-based view, we're not going to actually see any filters that are applied here. So we're not going to see the ability to filter based off the start address or end address. We're not going to see anything from that perspective. And actually, we're not going to be able to implement the start address and end address. There's a little bit of a item that I'm working on from that perspective when it comes to the var binary. But anyways, we're going to get some filters created for that. And as soon as we get those filters created for that and we restart the Nautobot process, we're actually going to see those filters appear within the Swagger API. Long-winded way of saying a bunch of different things. So let's go ahead and start our import. So from Nautobot.extras.filters, we're going to import our create updated filter set. And from Nautobot.utilities.filters, we import our base filter set and our tag filter. And then from Nautobot plugin IP range, models, because we only have one model and I don't care today, we're going to import let's go ahead and define our filter. So IP range filters set. We're going to inherit from our base filter set, and we're going to inherit from our create updated filter set. And then we're going to say our tags are going to be tag filter. So this is the only thing that we need to specify on the class level attributes, is that we're wanting to apply the tag filters that comes from core to this, instead of having to worry about trying to invent something on our own. So that's just where that's going to be coming from. We'll do our meta class, and we're going to specify our model. That's going to be IP range. We're going to specify our fields. ID, BRF, size, description, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to be publishing the start address and the end address into there, just because of, unfortunately, the way the var binary is. There's still a few bugs I need to work out on this specific plugin before that is implemented, but this is all that we're able to implement from a filter at this time. Like I said, more to come, just getting something started for now. So if we come back to views, maybe do from Nautobot plugin IP range dot filters, import our IP range filter set, and we do our filter, so filter class. Maybe filter set. Let me look this up. I was trying to do it from memory. Memory wasn't working for me. Filter set class is what we're looking for. IP range filter set. Let's go ahead and save that. We're going to see we're going to auto refresh. And let's come back over here to the Swagger API interface. And now my expectation is that whenever we pull up the plugins, we'll see a bunch of filters that are now published. So you can see we have BRF, size, subscription tags, greater than, less than, last updated, ID, VRF in, size in. So we see we have all these great items that have been automatically published in, and we don't have to worry about trying to specify every single item. This is all kind of built, batteries included for us from inheriting from the two base classes that we came from. Cool. So, but today's topic is not necessarily diving into the API. I just wanted to, since we're implementing that, we're also going to publish that into the APIs where we were able to consume it. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong side of notes. So now we've got our filter set. Now we need to create our filter set form. So let's come back over to our forms. Let's create our filter form. So class of IP range filter form, and we are going to be inheriting from our bootstrap mixin and from forms.form. We're going to specify our model as models dot, right? Thought I did that here, but evidently I didn't do what I thought I did, which is all good. And then we're going to specify a Q filter, and this is just going to inherit from the default Q filter. I feel like I am pulling the wrong imports, but we will see what we get. We can always come back and update this. This is a live section, so things are not always going to be perfect. So we're going to do a char field. Let's just required equals false, because we don't want to say everyone has to use the Q field. We're going to specify what the label is, and that's going to be just a imperative search field. And help text. And so the think about that. We're not going to implement Q. I'm sitting there thinking through it. I don't think we're going to implement Q. That's okay. We don't. It's not required. So we're going to do Vera equals dynamic model choice field. And based off the dynamic model choice field, we need to specify our query sets, a label, and we're going to say required equals false. Sitting here thinking about this, and we can also specify a description. That's going to be forms.char field. And we're going to say required equals false. And then a label equals this. All right, so that's all that we need for that. Come over to our views. Inside of our list view, let's go ahead and start adding these little bits and pieces. We need our filter set, which is going to be need to do our import of filters. IP range filter set, and then our filter set form equals forms dot IP range filter form. Let's go ahead and add our action buttons. It's going to be expecting tuple. And we're just going to do add. We're not going to be implementing import or export due to some constraints that I'm having right now with our binary. And then the last thing we need to implement for this to be working is going to be the table. So let's go ahead and create a tables.py. And let's go ahead and get started with what we are going to be implementing. So on our import, we're going to be sourcing from Django tables 2. Not from. I'm going to import Django tables 2 as tables, just to make it a little bit easier and cleaner when we're actually specifying items. Don't think I'm using that. All right, and then we can do from Nautobot utilities, not utilities, tables, import. We need our base table. We're going to need button columns, and we're going to need toggle columns. Yeah, that sounds about right. And then we need to import our models. So Nautobot plugin IP range models, import IP address, IP range. So same old, we'll do IP range, not IP range table. We're going to subclass that from base table. And we're going to specify a couple different things. So we're going to say our primary key, instead of specifying what our actual primary key is from a UUID field perspective or a char field, how we want to have it represented on the table, what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to specify this as a toggle column. So the toggle column is actually what's going to get us our little checkboxes on the left-hand side, which will be eventually used for bulk edit, but we're not quite there just yet. We're going to do our, and because we're wanting to overload an item to be able to give us the ability to go straight to the underlying object, we're going to overload our start address column as a tables dot column, and then we're just going to say linkify equals true. So essentially what this is going to give us is that the starting address of any instance of an object is going to link to the detailed view of said object. It's going for that. Do vref equals tables dot link column. So this is going to be pointing to our nested object, not our current object, not the IP range object, but the nested vref object, and linkify that. And then we're going to specify our actions. And our actions is going to have a buttons column. And it's going to specify our model of IP range. And then we're going to specify buttons that we care about. And then we're going to have an edit button and a delete button. Cool. Killer. Next, all we have to do is specify our meta class. So meta is going to be looking for our model of IP range. And then be looking for fields. It always does that for me. And the way that we specify these is going to be the default order that we see whenever we load the page. And as you can see, I'm not going to be specifying every single attribute on the object. I'm not going to be specifying created, updated, last updated by, or any of that information. I'm just going to be specifying the few columns that I care about. Fields. All right. So that gets us our table. Now if we come back over to our views and we do our just table that I need to specify. Yep, it's just called table. It's the attribute I need to specify. So I need to also make sure I do my import of tables. Dot IP range table. Let's go ahead and save this. Run it all the way around the world to get it this time. So now, is this going to work? Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And no, it's not going to work. We're getting this not able to get our absolute URL. Let's think. Where is this coming from? If we're looking to linkify a specific object and we're not able to reference to get absolute URL, where is that coming from? It's a method on the model. This was the method on the model that we implemented on Wednesday, but weren't using just yet because it had not been implemented. So we'll go ahead and save that. So now we refresh. Are we going to be running? Reverse match for IP range, no arguments found. Let's see, did we miss something on our get absolute URL? You know what? We absolutely did. The reason why we missed something is that the IP range view is expecting an argument. It's expecting our argument of the UUID. So to do that, we're going to pass in args. And if you wanted to, you could pass it in as squares. We're just going to do it as args because there's only one and it's easy peasy. Self.pk. Let me save that. Now let's see if we're going to be off to the races and cooking with fire. Losing confidence in myself. I don't think this is going to work. What's the next error we're going to have to troubleshoot? Okay. Looks kind of funny, but it worked. Let's see. Let's refresh it, and yeah, that's what it looks like. So let's go take a peek at a couple different things. So our table looks correct. We got our inheriting from our base table with our primary key at the toggle column, start address, VRF, actions, buttons. That looks good. Nothing that's really jumping out to me just yet for that. So, okay. Take a look at our views. Perplexing. Because this is not what happens on mine that I have my other stuff built with, but I'm sure we can find out what's going on. This should have nothing to do with it. Drop into elements. Trying to think. So that form is correct. All right. We're going to jump into the next little bit because I'm just wondering if maybe things are airing out just a little bit because of an upstream template. Because there's a couple more things that I think we might need to implement. All right, so let's go ahead and add our IP range bulk delete view. Like I said, I don't think this doesn't seem like this should be it, but let's just go ahead and finish implementing all of our views and see if this resolves our issue. Bulk delete view. And the bulk delete view is going to be looking for a query set models dot range dot objects dot all. It's going to also be looking for a table. And that's going to be tables dot IP range table. Back here. Let's add bulk delete. Added our bulk delete. What am I getting here? Bulk delete view. I need to save that. Got my delete. So I'm getting there. So I'm wondering if there's something that's getting clogged up because of that. So the next one that we're going to need to add is going to be our bulk edit view. So class IP range bulk edit view. That's going to be inheriting from generic dot bulk edit view. Then we're going to be looking for a query set. IP range dot objects dot all. Need a filter set. Filters dot IP range filter set. It's going to need table. That's going to be tables dot IP range table. Then we need a form. So we're going to need to go create a form real quick. So it's going to be the bulk edit form. So we're going to start off just as we've been doing already. So IP range bulk edit form. And the bulk edit form is going to be inheriting from the bootstrap mixin. And then we need to also do an import of the bulk edit form that we're going to be subclassing from. All right. Our primary key attribute is going to be forms dot forms dot model multiple choice field, and specify a query set as IP range dot objects dot all. And we're going to do something kind of interesting. We're going to do a widget. So widgets give us the ability to overload the CSS. And we're going to see forms dot multiple hidden input. So essentially what's going to happen is that all these items that are going to be within the form, they are not actually going to have a PK option. You're not going to see the PK attribute anywhere, and it's going to be hidden, and it's going to be automatically selected. So we know when we submit it, it knows what specific QUIDs, so what specific instances of the objects to apply the bulk edit to. We're going to do our description. It's going to be forms dot char field. We're going to say required equals false. And then we're going to do our VRF equals forms dot. Actually, don't want to do a forms dot that. I want to do a dynamic model choice field and just pass in our query set. Just like we did there, query set and a label. And then we're going to do our meta. And we're just going to specify our nullable fields, which let's go take a look at our models. Remember which specific fields we have null equals true, and null equals true is just on VRF. So we can come back here, so nullable fields equals VRF. Cool, I believe that's all we need to do there. Come back here and we can do forms dot IP range bulk edit form. Save that, and then we're going to come here. We're going to do the same old song and dancey dance where we implement our new IP range bulk edit, bulk delete, edit, save that. Let me review my notes. Object add, delete, edit, detail, delete, edit, change log. Yep, that looks like that is all of the views. Fingers crossed, all of our CSS fixes. That's just an interesting little happy little accident, but it's not the end of the world. It's something that could be very quickly, that should in theory be able to be very quickly fixed and resolved. We do see that all of our filtering and our sorting does work as expected. Our editing works. I can select these and click edit. And we can set the same description to all of those. And so we now see test. So it's just having a little bit of CSS fun times. I'm just curious. Curiouser and curiouser on what's going on with my table. So our meta inside a base table is the culprit. So we're not just going to be fully overloading a meta and just creating our own meta. We're actually going to be subclassing from base table meta. So now I'm expecting, I'm fingers crossed, hoping and praying that now that I save this, I refresh this, boom, worked as expected. Took a little bit, probably took a little bit longer than I expected, but we got it up and going. I'm running a little bit over time, but that's all good. Got one last thing we're going to do. We are going to do our UI views. We're going to not do our UI views, that's what we just did. We're going to test our UI views. So let's go into our tests, do a new file of tests ui.py. We're going to need to do a couple little imports. So from Nautobot.utilities, testing, import, view test cases, and from Nautobot, plugin IP range dot models, import IP range. And then let's go ahead and do our class of IP range, view tests. And similar to how we did with the API view tests, we are going to do view test cases dot view test case. So the plural dot singular. I'm not even telling you the truth there. We're doing primary object view test case. I'm not reading my own notes. If I read my notes, I would have seen that. So it's all good. So we're going to specify a couple little attributes. So model equals our IP range. We need to specify the form data that we'll be submitting. This is going to be a dictionary, and this is going to have our start address, and then our end address. So it's going to be trying to submit the form, and in 003, our bulk edit data, and so it's also going to be looking for a dictionary, and we're just going to say description, and we're going to say test update description. And then similar to our API, we're going to do a class method. Set up test data. And I don't need to do super. And I'm actually just going to cheat. And I'm just going to go yoink. Copy that. Come down here, paste that in. Cool, cool. And there's a couple different views that are not implemented. So the specific one that I'm going to be talking about is going to be the bulk import view. So there are 3 specific tests that if we were to run this are going to fail. So if we go ahead and save that, and I grab another terminal session, and I do an export. And then I do a Nautobot server test keep DB. We still got our DB from last time. And we can see that our test jumped up to 49 tests. And we see very quickly that we have 3 errors. And if we look, we're unable to reverse on the IP range import because those are not implemented methods. So what we can do, because these are not actually implemented and I do not care to try and test for something that's not implemented, we are just going to do similar to what we did with the brief fields and just automatically pass on them. So we're not necessarily caring about them because these are not implemented. but we're still wanting to take full advantage of the testing framework that has been provided for us and not have to worry about creating our own test or having to do multiple different test classes that pull just the specific ones that we care about. All right. So now if we run this, I'm expecting to get no failures. So cool. Took a little bit longer than expected today. We went through, we created all of our UI views. We added our filter that was adding to our API as well. We talked about all the different filters that are automatically exposed without having to do much lift from us. We created a table, created some forms. We glazed over some HTML because that's always not my funnest thing in the world. And we've got a fully functioning plugin that has UI elements and API elements, full changelog, all this super cool stuff. And so if we wanted to come in to here, and let's just remove that description, and we update that, and we say a description of test. Let's just test this, apply. We can see our filters work, and we're good to go. On that note, it's time to go eat dinner. It's been a pleasure, everyone. Happy to try and share the knowledge and knowledge and everything that I've learned along my journey. And I look forward to doing further series. And next week we'll be kicking off with some development environments on ChatOps and a development environment for SSO. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week.